It's your girl, Goddess Raven Botanica, and this is Goddess Raven's Botanica. And of course, I'm Goddess Raven. Yeah, I'm still recovering from the sniffles, so just bear with me if my nose is stuffy or if I'm not on point like I need to be, okay? I'm just a little bit still underneath the weather, but I wanted to get this out. So let's do a deep dive into Trump's relationship with the Black and Latino community. Let's take it back to the 70s. So, what happened in the 70s? A big to do, and this started in New York. So, she seems like the model tenant, a 33-year-old nurse who was living at the YWCA in Harlem. She had come to rent a one-bedroom at the still unfinished Wilshire Apartments in the Jamaica Estates neighborhood of Queens. She filled out what the rental agent remembers as a beautiful application. She did not even want to look at the unit. There was just one hitch. Maxine Brown was black. Stanley Leibowitz, the rental agent, talked to his boss, Fred C. Trump. I asked him what to do, and he said, take the application and put it in a drawer and leave it there. This is what Stanley recalled, who's now 88 years old, in an interview. Now, in the late 1963, just months before President Lloyd B. Johnson signed the landmark Civil Rights Act, and the tall Fred Trump was approaching the apex of his building career. He was about to complete the jewel in the crown of his middle class housing empire. Seven 23-story towers called Trump Village spread across nearly 40 acres in Coney Island. He was also grooming his hair. His son, Donald Trump, 17 years old, would soon enroll at Fordham University in the Bronx, living at his parents' home in Queens and spending much of his free time touring construction sites in his father's Cadillac, driven by a black chauffeur. His father was his idol, Stanley says. Anytime he would come into the building, Donald would be right by his side. Over the next decade, as Donald Trump assumed an increasingly prominent role in business, the company's practice of turning away potential Black tenants was painstakingly documented by activists and organizations that viewed equal housing as the next frontier in the civil rights struggle. The Department of Justice undertook its own investigation and in 1973 sued Trump management for discriminating against Blacks. Both Fred Trump and the company chairman and Donald Trump, its president, were named as defendants. It was front page news, and for Donald, amounted to his debut in the public eye. He was reported as saying absolutely ridiculous. That was his quote for the government's allegations against all of them. Looking back, Trump's response to the lawsuit can be seen as a little prelude to how he handles the subsequent challenges in business and politics. Rather than quietly trying to settle, as another New York developer had done a couple years earlier, he turned it into a protracted battle, complete with angry denials, character assassination, charges that the government was trying to force him to rent to welfare recipients, and $100 million countersuit accusing the Department of Justice of defamation. Well, when it was all said and done and over, Trump declared victory, emphasizing that the consent decree he ultimately signed did not include an admission of guilt, but an investigation by the New York Times drawing on decades old files from the New York City Commission on Human Rights, Internal Department of Justice records, court documents, and interviews with numerous tenants, civil rights activists, prosecutors, uncovered a long, dark history of racial bias at his family's properties in New York and beyond. That history has taken on fresh relevance, with Trump arguing that Black voters should support him over Hillary Clinton, whom he has called a bigot. While there is no evidence that Trump personally set the rental policies at his father's properties, he was hands on while they were in place, working out of a cubicle in Trump's management Brooklyn offices as early as the summer of 1968. Then and now, Trump has steadfastly denied any awareness of any discrimination at his Trump properties. While Trump declined to interview for an article, his general counsel, Allen, said in a statement that there was no merit or allegations, and there has been no suggestion of racial bias towards prospective residents in the luxury housing that Trump focused on as his career took off in Manhattan in the 1980s. In the past, Trump has treated the 1968 case as a footnote in the narrative of his career. In his memoir, The Art of the Deal, he dispensed with it in 5 paragraphs. And while stumping in Ohio, he even singled out his work at his father's properties in Cincinnati, admitting that at the time the development was subject of a separate discrimination lawsuit. So this wasn't his first go around with being hit with discrimination of not wanting to rent to minorities. One that included claims of racial slurs being thrown at people. That's right, racial slurs uttered by a manager whom Trump had personally praised. So the manager was, yeah, basically calling the potential people that were trying to rent the N word and different other words, allegedly. As eager as he was to leave behind the working class precinct of New York, where Fred Trump had made his fortune, Donald Trump often speaks admirably of him, recalling what he learned at his father's side when the Trump name was synonymous with housing, not yet with luxury, celebrity, or polarizing brands of politics. My legacy has its roots in my father's legacy. So I just want you to remember that little thought of it in his father's legacy and what somebody who knows Trump's father says about him. Listen to this.
I'm a 92-year-old man, and I remember when Trump's father was in our village and talked to me personally. He was really a fan of Hitler. He said that dictatorship is not as bad as people think. He says one man rule is better than having too many people trying to bring their opinion up. And that was the same thing his son did. He believes that the dictatorship is the best thing for this country. And sooner or later, you're going to wake up and believe when he becomes president, he'll become a dictator. So, America, be aware.
So, this is the first time that those thoughts and people have come out about Fred Trump's view, especially when it comes to Fred Trump and minorities. He didn't have any tolerance for them. He didn't care for them, had no tolerance for them, and obviously the DOJ had to sue. He didn't want them living in his building. So let's keep going, y'all. Keep on. Child, I tell you, Fred Trump got into the housing business when he was in his early 20s, building a single family home for a neighbor in Queens. Now, during World War II, his constructed housing for shipyard workers and Navy personnel in Norfolk, Virginia. After the war, he returned to New York, setting his sights on bigger and more ambitious projects, realized with the help of federal government loans. Oh, yeah, federal loans. Okay. His, his establishment as one of the city's biggest developers was hardly free of controversy. The Senate Banking Committee subpoenaed him in 1954 during an investigation into profiteering off federal housing loans. Under oath, he acknowledged that he had widely overstated the cost of a development to obtain a larger mortgage from the government. So this is where Trump learned these dealings from. In 1966, an investigative journalist, Wayne Burnett, detailed in Trump, The Greatest Show on Earth, a New York legislative committee accused Fred Trump of using state money to earmark for middle income housing to build a shopping center instead. So what was supposed to be middle income housing, affordable housing, he built a shopping center instead. One lawmaker called Trump greedy and grasping. By this point, the Trump organization business practices were beginning to come under scrutiny left and right from civil rights groups that had received complaints from prospective African American tenants, people like Maxine Brown. Now, Stanley, the rental agent at Wilshire, remember Brown repeatedly inquiring about the apartment. Finally, she realized what it was all about, he said. Brown's first instinct was to let her matter go. She was happy enough at the YWCA. I have a big room and 2 meals a day for $5 a week. Damn. But a friend, Mae Wiggins, who had also been denied an apartment at the Wilshire, told her that she ought to have her own place with a private bathroom and kitchen. She encouraged Brown to file a complaint with the New York City Commission on Human Rights, and she was doing it. We knew there was prejudice in renting. It was rampant in New York. It made me really feel bad, and I wanted to do something to right the wrong. Stanley was called to testify at the commission hearing on Brown's case, asked to estimate how many blacks lived in Trump's various properties, and the guy said, to my knowledge, none. After the hearing, Brown was offered an apartment in Wilshire. And in the spring of 1964, she moved in. For 10 years, she said she was the only African American in the building. Lord have mercy. Complaints about the Trump organization rental policies continued to mount. By 1967, state investigators found that out of 3,700 apartments in Trump Village, seven were occupied by African American families. Like Brown, the few minorities who did live in Trump owned buildings often had to force their way in. A black woman named Agnes Agnes Brown Bunn recalled hearing in early 1970 about a vacant Trump apartment in another part of Queens from a white friend who lived in the building. But when she went, she was told there was no vacancies. The super came out and stood there until I left the property. Bunn testified about the experience at a meeting with the New York City Commission on Human Rights in 1970, according to a summary recovered from the New York City Municipal Archives. She told a Trump lawyer that it was known that no colored people were wanted as tenants in the buildings. The lawyers concluded that the episode was all a misunderstanding, and Bunn and her husband, a Manhattan accountant, soon became the building's first black tenant. Unlike the public schools, the housing market could not be desegregated simply by court order. Even after a passage of Fair Housing Act in 1968, which prohibited racial discrimination in housing, developments in white neighborhoods continued to rebuff blacks. Now, for years, it fell largely to local, civil rights groups to highlight the problem by sending white testers into apartment complexes after blacks had been turned away. And you know what? To this day, it still happens with redlining. It still happens that, black people are still suing realty offices, appraisers, for being appraised lower, their homes being appraised lower than it, supposed to. And when they send their white friend in, it's double and triple the cost. The house is worth way more than it was before. Now, this is all the stuff that's going on, right? So everything was sort of whispers and innuendos, and you wanted to try to bring it out into the open. This is what Phyllis recalled, who volunteered for Operation Open City, a housing rights advocacy organization. I'd walked in with my freckles and red hair and Jewish name and get an apartment immediately. The complaints of discrimination were not limited to New York. In 1969, a young black couple, Haywood and Cash, sued after being denied a home in Cincinnati and one of the first projects in which Donald Trump, fresh out of college, played an active role in. Cash was repeatedly rejected by Trump's rental agent. According to court records and notes kept by housing opportunities made equal of Cincinnati, was sent in white testers posing as young couples while he waited in the car. After the agent Irvin offered to test an apartment, they brought cash in. Irvin grew furious, shoving them out the office and calling the young female tester a, a nigger lover. Yes, a nigger lover. To this day, I have not forgotten the fury in his voice and in his face. Durham recalled recently, adding that she also remembered him calling her a traitor to the race. The Cashes were ultimately offered an apartment. At a campaign stop in Ohio recently, Trump shared war memories of his time in Cincinnati, calling it one of his early successes of his career. And in Art of the Deal, he praised that manager, Irvin, without using his surname, calling him a fabulous man and an amazing manager. Irvin was a classic, he wrote. This is the same Irvin that was calling people the N lovers and stuff and a traitor to their race, calling people traitors to their race. The young Trump also spent time in Norfolk helping manage the housing complexes his father built there in 1940s. Similar complaints of discrimination surfaced at those properties beginning in the 1960s and were documented by Ellis James, an equal housing advocate. The managers on site were usually not very sophisticated. James, now 78. Some were dedicated segregationists, but most of them were more concerned with following the policies they were directed by Trump's to keep. Donald Trump said he first heard about the lawsuit, which was filed in 1973, on his car radio. So that's a little bit of the whole situation with that and his practices. And this is a practice that he continued on for a very long time. So let's see. That his policy on that. Okay. And now here's another thing. Black and Latino Americans think Donald Trump's actions have made life worse for people of color. New York. Large majorities of Black and Latino Americans think Donald Trump's actions as president have made things worse for people like them. And about two-thirds of Americans overall disapprove of how he's handling race relations. About half of all Americans think Trump actions have been bad for African Americans, Muslims, and women, and slightly more than half say they have been bad for Hispanics as well. Now, as far as Trump and his practices, let's hear what happened with somebody who had a real estate deal with him and what he had to go through.
Job I've ever had. It was the toughest construction job I've ever had. Toughest construction job most people have ever seen.
One of those involved in the Taj's construction was Martin Rosenberg.
Had I known that Trump was going to take over the job, I would have never done the job.
He says the Taj job nearly cost him his company, which was contracted to provide glass, mirrors, and doors.
He promised if we did a good job, we would get paid.
He says Trump owed him over $1 million, and he wasn't alone. Rosenberg says Trump didn't honor the contracts of over 100 contractors who helped complete the Taj Mahal.
The man didn't pay us because he didn't have the money. Bottom line.
It's Marjorie McAfee with ABC News. I wondered if you might consider doing an interview with me.
Getting other people like Rosenberg to talk to my producer for this story was extraordinarily difficult.
I sent him an email to confirm, date and time for this past weekend, and he literally vanished.
But Rosenberg would speak because he's already gone head to head with Donald Trump.
You took on Donald Trump.
Somebody had to do it.
Rosenberg and 6 other of the contractors banded together on behalf of the entire group and forced a meeting with Trump.
I had a telephone call from Mr. Trump's personal attorney. I said, well, we want to get paid. He says, well, how can I stop this meeting? I said, it's relatively simple. Give me a check.
After several rounds of negotiations, Rosenberg says he and the other contractors settled with Trump for less than what they were owed, with devastating results.
Some went bankrupt. Some lost their businesses. We survived because we were very busy in Atlantic City.
So that's how his dealings were with people, contractors. He didn't pay them. People lost money. People went out of business. Okay, this is a man who's supposed to be a genius when it comes to business practices, and he wrote a book about art of the deal. He's supposed to know everything about a deal. But if you look at his business practices, a lot of it, there's a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of foreclosures. A lot of the businesses that he used to own, he doesn't own anymore. A lot of them are just names in business and name only, but he doesn't actually own some of the properties. But, some people feel like, the Trump name is big enough and globally known that they'll keep the business in his name, but it's really not his company anymore. So let's keep going, y'all. Let's keep going. Whoo, child. So the poll provides a bleak assessment of how the nation views Trump on race issues as he runs for a second term and repeatedly boasts of his popularity among African Americans and Latinos. Trump has consistently said his economic policies have been good for African Americans and other people of color, but the poll shows few Black Americans think that's true. Just 4% say they think Trump's actions have been good for African Americans in general, while 81% think he has made things worse. Similar share, similar, oh my God, shares of Black Americans think Trump has been bad for Hispanics, Muslims, and women. He speaks nothing but hate rhetoric. Chris Smith, 38, an African American information technologist who's in Columbia, Tennessee, who considers himself independent, believes Democratic. If the leader of the country is free to speak like that, there's going to be people who think it's okay to speak like that. He's making people live their lives in fear. Trump has drawn widespread condemnation for his racist rhetoric throughout his presidency. He warned of an invasion at the southern border, posted racist tweets about four women of color in Congress, and attacked Democratic U.S. Republican Elijah Cummings' largely black district as a rat and rodent infested mess. He showered praises on the Confederate General Robert E. Lee, a slaveholder who fought to protect the institution of slavery during the U.S. Civil War, and said that there were fine people on both sides of clashes between the white nationalists and the counter protesters. But he has claimed he doesn't have a racist bone in his body. The poll comes weeks after a suspected gunman who is white apparently wrote an anti Hispanic rant before opening fire in El Paso, Texas, with an AK 47 style rifle on Walmart shoppers, many of them Latino. Some blame Trump's rhetoric for inciting the gunman. Simon, a Nigerian immigrant who lives in Houston and is a registered Republican, says the president's rhetoric on migrants make him feel uncomfortable. I think some of his immigration policies have been hurtful to countries with large minority population. There's a lot of uncertainty now. 69% of Latinos think Trump's action have been bad for Hispanics in general, while only 19% think they've been good. Majority of Latinos also think Trump's actions have been bad for African Americans, Muslims, and women. It's his attitude. He just has this cocky way about him. It's what he says in his speeches and the way he treated Michael Trillin. I'm appalled. I'm appalled. Now, I think he's trying to bring this country together. Some people think everybody has a fair opportunity to make it in this country. Among Republicans, about 6 in 10 say they think Trump has been good for women and Latinos and Black Americans. Fewer than 4 in 10 think his actions have been good for Muslims. No more than only 2 in 10 Republicans think Trump's actions have been bad for any of the groups asked about in the poll. Now, let's talk about these facts. Yeah, let's get into these facts, okay? Because that's something that's always been thrown around, you know? That has definitely something that's been thrown around, and it's been thrown around a lot. What exactly did Trump do that he's getting these praises for? Like, everybody talks about, he sent how much money to the historically black colleges. He did unemployment. He did this. He did that. He did that. Well, let's get to some fact checking, okay? Let's get into some nitty gritty, some tea, because that's what's important. Now, Lil Wayne set social media buzz, when he said that he was the best rapper alive. and revealed meeting privately with Donald Trump, joining the pantheon of past their prime black male rappers, including Ice Cube and 50, embracing the president. Just had a great meeting with the real Donald Trump. Besides what he's done so far with criminal reform, the Platinum Plan is going to give the community real ownership, he tweeted, alongside a now viral photo of the rapper and the president side by side, smiling and offering a thumbs up. Tens of millions of Americans have already voted. This is Pat. Tens of millions of people already voted, and the decision came down. Trump lost. Okay, Trump has always talked about, famously asked black voters what they had to lose by supporting him in 2016. A tumultuous 4 years in the White House provides answers. Uh, oh, my nose. The president frequently touts a low black unemployment rate, funding for historical black colleges and universities, opportunity zones, and criminal justice reform as evidence. But the wins Trump's claims come with a combination of skepticism and a little bit of bullshit. So let's get into it. The morning after Philadelphia police fatally shot a black man, 27-year-old Walter Wallace Jr., Trump praised officers as the most incredible people on earth. Later that day, his campaign rolled out a new ad, Uphold the Law, a 30-second spot that falsely accused Biden and Kamala Harris of fanning flames while American cities burned, refusing to strongly condemn violence. The narrator says, as supporting bail funds that help let rioters, looters, and dangerous criminals out on the street and out from jail. In Joe Biden's America, we'll all be in danger, said a white man identified in the ad as a veteran police officer. And at Monday's rally, a rally that was just already passed, Trump claimed he was doing so incredibly well with black voters because his administration passed criminal justice reform. Trump won 7 than 8% of black voters in 2016 and has talked more about criminals than criminal justice in the closing days of his campaign. He did, however, sign the bipartisan First Step Act and has granted 28 pardons and 16 sentence uh, commutations. Now, we're going to break it down. Former President Barack Obama tapped two black attorney generals to serve in his administration, Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch. And he used his executive authority to create a task force on 21st century policing and granted clemency to more than 1,900 people, the highest figure since Harry Truman administration granted clemency to more than 2,000 people. Now, under Trump, he only granted 28 pardons and 16 sentence commutations. Barack Obama gave granted clemency to 1,900 people. Let that sink in. Trump advisors thought the president's support for the First Step Act would help him win re-election down the road. But Adriana, executive director of Black PAC, cautioned that African Americans are not single issue voters. Black voters are looking for comprehensive agenda that will get at the structural barriers blocking black mobility in this country. Experts do credit the law, which passed both chambers of Congress with veto-proof supermajorities for reducing the federal prison population. The Justice Department announced last summer that the First Step Act would release more than 3,100 federal prison inmates and said its retroactive sentences reform had led to nearly 1,700 sentence reductions. The Sentencing Project said last year that Black Americans made up 91% of everyone receiving those reductions. Whew. Now, while we're congratulating on that point, Trump reinstituted the federal death penalty. 7 people have been executed this year under the policy. 5 were white and 1 Native American, and the other was black. And there are 55 federal death row prisoners. 25 are African American, 22 are white, 7 are Latino, and 1 is Asian. In West Salem, Wisconsin, on Tuesday, this had passed. The president claimed the unemployment rate for African Americans had reached the lowest level ever recorded in a short period of time. Under the Trump administration, the black unemployment rate steadily improved, dropping from 5.4% at its bottom in August of 2019 compared to 7.5% when Trump took office in January of 2017. But the achievement is attributable to economic growth that was already revving when Trump took office. And a January 2020 poll found that few black people think he deserves much credit for those numbers. Many instead feel the credit should be given to Trump's predecessor, Barack Obama. Looking at the trend in employment numbers, it's not hard to see why that would be the case. The number of Black, Hispanic, and white Americans working over the past 7 years increased steadily until the pandemic emerged. And that's when things kind of switched. Yeah. All right. So let's see. Basically, we saw a continuation of steady growth of economic that we saw in the years prior to the administration taking over. Under the Trump administration, she said Black workers did not see employment levels ever go above the trend. Now, Ellis added that when the labor market is tight, like it was the first 3 years of Trump's administration, discrimination tends to decline. Oftentimes, the gains to a growing economy are not incurred to those most historically disadvantaged until you get to much tighter labor market, and that is the natural consequence of workers becoming more scarce and employers having less discrimination to discriminate. Even with record low unemployment rates in 2019, Black Americans still had fewer jobs than their white counterparts, even for those with college or advanced degrees, according to research by the EPI. Those gains had been erased once COVID hit. And as the labor market has slowly recovered from economic shock, the unemployment rate for Black Americans has showed little signs of improving month to month. In April, when unemployment peaked at 14.7%, the highest level seen since the Great Depression, the unemployment rate for Black workers was even higher. It was at 16.7%. By September, the share of unemployment Black workers still struggling to find a job only dropped to 12.1%. Now, in comparison, the white unemployment rate has already halved since it hit 14.2% in April, down 7% in September. Black workers have also faced greater risk of exposure to coronavirus during the pandemic, as they make up 1 in 6 of all frontline essential jobs. They represent large shares of the workforce in childcare, healthcare, grocery, public transportation, and the warehouse industry. And Black businesses have faced greater hurdles to tap into job saving pandemic aid programs. Many banks limited their initial application poll for the Small Business Rescue Paycheck Protection Program to previous customers, a staff report by House Coronavirus Subcommittee found. Democrats and nonprofit argued that shut out of many minority-owned businesses that lack business banking relationships from the program, which offered forgiving loans to companies that kept their workers on the payroll. In January, Trump baffled historic Black college university leaders when he claimed he saved their institution by signing bipartisan legislation that included annual funding for historically Black colleges and universities. The bill is a 10-year renewal of funding. During Obama's 8 years in office, mandatory HBCU funding ranged from 80 million to 85 million per year. The same has been true during Trump's administration. He started in January saying he saved HBCU People were just shocked, said Walter Kimbrough, president of Dillard University, a private HBCU in New Orleans. The amount of funding for HBCU is the same thing that we had under President Obama. 17% of Black students with bachelor degrees earn them from HBCUs, which are more reliant on government funding and have much smaller endowments than predominantly white institutions. Even after Trump signed the legislation, Michael, president and CEO of the United Negro College Fund, warned that HBCUs are woefully underfunded at an annual State of the HBCU address in March. He's pushing for a $1 billion grant for HBCU infractures, a doubling of Pell grants, and a tripling of the Title III funding in the Future Act. Now, let's see.
I voted for Donald Trump. You said that Trump has done more for the black community than any president. What has he done? He's done a lot. Actually, no. I'm surprised that most people don't really know. I'm asking your name. Okay, name. I'm going to. For starters, because this is important as an educated man, and $250 million annually has been allocated to HBCUs, which is big. But I want to take care of them. No, sir. No, and minority schools, and minorities all together. It's for people of color. And that's what the 90 million of it went to black schools. And not only that, it was about to be expired. He took the initiative to not let it expire. And not only that, but you're wrong. You got 10 years. You're wrong. It's being done. You said, why do I have to keep coming back every year to get money? But you just said that's a lot. The program that you're talking about started under President George W. Bush. The president and CEO of the United Negro Fund thanked him publicly. Will you please listen? See again, though. See, when you're operating in an alternative world, I'm giving you for real facts. Let me say it again. The people think about it. Listen, the United Negro Fund president and CEO, Mr. Lomax, did not thank him publicly. The program you're speaking of started under President George W. Bush. It continued under President Barack Obama. It expired. What you do not know is that Donald Trump zeroed that program out of his budget. It was Congressman Almond Adams of North Carolina who put it back in the budget. She was the co-chair of the Congressional HBCU caucus. Then it went to the United States Senate. Donald Trump, let me tell you again, Mark, sign off on it. No, you got to sign off on it. Again, Donald Trump's budget, which he submitted to Congress, removed the money. Congress put it back in led by Almond Adams. Now, do you know who broke this thing down? A gentleman named Walter Kimbrough. Do you know who Walter Kimbrough is? Two-time HBCU president who detailed it, who was actually in that meeting in the Oval Office when Trump was there. So what you're sitting on, you say, oh, $250 million. Let me ask this question. How much money have HBCUs gotten in the last 3 years of the Biden administration? How much money have HBCUs gotten in the last 3 years of the Biden administration? I don't know, but I never paid $10 for eggs or $5 for eggs. What school did you say you went to? I never paid $10 for eggs or $5 for eggs.
But here's the thing. Ain't nobody paying no $5 for no damn gas. Nowhere. Okay? You know, ain't nobody paying $7 in Jersey for gas. Ain't nobody paying $12 for gas and stuff in New York City. Okay? But they like to tell us that shish. So let's keep going. The Opportunity Zone. At a campaign stop that he did in Greensboro, North Carolina, Vice President Mike Pence credited the president for creating more than 8,000 opportunity zones, bringing jobs and opportunity to our inner city families. Opportunity zones are tax incentives to encourage those with capital gains to invest in low income and undercapitalized communities. Opportunity zones provide progressively bigger tax breaks to investors depending on how long they leave their investment in designated areas. So This would explain why gentrification is happening in Brooklyn, parts of Jersey, parts of other states that are seeing, all these companies come in and all this, news, the Starbucks and all these businesses coming in. This is the reason why, because they're getting the big, progressively bigger tax break for them to come in. So the reason why Brooklyn is now unaffordable, parts of Bronx is now becoming unaffordable. Shout out to my people in the Bronx and Brooklyn. People in Yonkers. The reason why things is not, being priced out. The reason why things is, you can't find nothing under $3,000-4,000 is because of this opportunity zone. Okay, it's because of this. The tax incentives to encourage those with capital gains to invest in these low income, undercapitalized communities. They're going in because they're giving breaks to move in there. This is why those buildings are coming up. And they're given very generous, bigger tax breaks. Okay? And the longer they stay there, the better the tax breaks because investors must stay for at least 10 years to receive the full benefit. And once they receive the full benefit, they can move on to other wealthier areas and take that investment and money and move it there. Now, a feature of the president's $1.5 trillion tax cuts, the program was intended to benefit Black and Hispanic and low income communities, but there's very little data about what actually happening in opportunity zones. There isn't a full accounting of the number of opportunity zone projects, let alone basic information such as what those projects are, why they're being pursued, and who's benefiting from them. Now, when it comes to these tax breaks on homes and realty and everything, get really nervous because that's the area that Trump is good at, you know, using. And of course, if he can get, he knows, like, a lot of real estate investors. This is perfect for like a real estate investor or these big investors that are up to, like, try to do a little flam scam bam Ponzi scam, kind of scheme, use the low income community to get their breaks. This could be this, because look at this, they can't even keep track of what is what. Like, there's very little data about what's happening in the opportunity zones. Now, if that's not crazy, I don't know what is. They don't know. A June Urban Institute report found that although there are a compelling example of community benefit, the Opportunity Zone incentive as a whole is not living up to its economic and community development goals. The report also found that a vast majority of Opportunity Zone capital appears to be going into real estate. Did I tell you? Rather than operating businesses, meaning the opportunity zones are creating a substantial long-term jobs. No, they're putting up buildings that are not even affordable to the community as a whole. So George Gonzalez, a research analyst, he's like saying, like, the tax benefits for investors incentivize what he described as an economic development over community development. The difference between the former prioritize profits while the latter is focused on improving the community. So basically, right now, everything's about the profit. Just because of the way it's designed, you would expect that there'd be more money flowing into, just because of the way it's designed, you would expect that there's more money flowing into luxury housing and hotels. Now, when it comes to housing for Black, Latino, and minorities, Trump has routinely bragged about saving the suburbs after he scraped an Obama rule requiring localities to track patterns of segregation or lose federal funding. So he basically, what was in place to help us, so they could track redlining issues, track segregation, track the problems to fix the problems. Trump nixed that. He got rid of it. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development replaced the 2015 affirmatively furthering Fair Housing Act with a much weaker rule in July, using a waiver to exempt the new regulation from public comment requirements. Public comments allow people to weigh in on the proposed rules before being finalized. But by bypassing the critical step, the agency has essentially expedited a months long process without any public input. How did that help us? How did that help us? And people say Obama didn't do anything, but he did. He's using absolutely baseless fears of crime and decreased property value as attempted triggers to get a white anxiety about living with people of color and African Americans in particular, and the ideal of integration itself. This is what Thomas Silverstein, a counsel in the Fair Housing Community Development Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Not only is he being basically explicitly racist here, he's also just operating in a fact free environment, immune to any sort of evidence about housing policies. He is basically screwing all the progress that has been made to improve housing for minorities. He has basically taken us back into the 1960s and 50s. How's he helping? Secretary Ben Carson, oh Lord, also finalized a new rule in September overhauling Obama's administration's 2013 impact rule. The new rule would require plaintiffs to meet a higher threshold to prove unintentional discrimination, known as disparity impact, and giving defendants more leeway to review the claims. A federal court intervened this month, the day before the rule was set to take effect last week. This is a while ago, issuing a preliminary nationwide injunction to bar HUD from implementing the new regulation until the merits of the lawsuit brought by civil rights advocates have been decided. It's not just HUD working to roll back rules meant to combat discriminatory mortgage lending practices known as redlining, though. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has dramatically reduced enforcement of fair lending laws under Trump's appointees, rolled out a final rule in April exempting smaller lenders from reporting requirements under the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, a law that tracks discriminatory lenders. So basically, what the did he do for y'all? Because everything that was could have been in place to help, he ruined it. Now, criminal justice reform. In December 2018, Trump signed the First Step Act into law. It passed Congress on a largely bipartisan basis. It includes several provisions aimed at scaling back on incarceration that emerged as crime rates spiked in 1990s, largely due to the emergence of crack cocaine. The law shortened mandatory minimum sentences, sealed back scaled back the federal three-strike rules, and gave judges more leeway in sentencing nonviolent offenders. It also made the 2010 Fair Sentencing Act retroactive. The law signed by Obama reduced the difference in sentences that were imposed for crack and powder cocaine differences that often overlapped with race of the defendant, but applied only from 2010 forward. The First Step Act extended that backwards. The law has been hailed as an important step in reducing racial unbalanced application of drug laws in the United States. It does build on what Obama did, but as our fact checkers have written, goes further. It's worth remembering, though, that the vast majority of Black Americans aren't directly affected by this provision. Black Americans, thanks in part to the unevenness and bias of criminal justice system, are disproportionately likely to be incarcerated. Now, by Oh my gosh. But in 2001, analysts from the Bureau of Justice Statistics found that even at that point, only 1 in 6 Black Americans were likely to end up in a state or federal prison. Again, the law is important in fixing disparities. Trump does have a habit, though, of reducing the needs of Black Americans to revisions of criminal sentencing and improving inner cities, which only captures a small part of the Black experience. Ah, Lord. Ay, 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 ay. Healthcare. Trump claimed that his administration has expanded affordable options for better healthcare. Is not actually something he includes in his patter about what he has done for Black Americans. He appears to be referring to changing the implementations of the Affordable Care Act by expanding the ability of insurers to provide less expensive and less comprehensive coverage. The Affordable Act had reduced the number of uninsured Black Americans by a third, thankfully largely to the expansion of Medicaid. Trump administration supports a legal effort to basically eradicate the law entirely, erasing provisions, including the mandate that insurers cover those with pre-existing conditions. So he wants to get rid of that. Now, Walter Kimbrough, president of Dillard University in New Orleans, offered his own analysis of Trump's claim about HBCU funding in a series of tweets. The president did sign the bill for fiscal 2020, which provided record HBCU funding. It was a result of a bipartisan work in Congress. The president simply signed it as part of the overall budget for the nation. Trump additionally signed the Future Act, passed bipartisan votes in both chambers, providing additional financial support for institutions by continuing a program started under George W. Bush. Signing the law, Kilbur argues, mirrored an action taken by Obama after the funding stream was set to expire during his presidency. At any other time, Trump has claimed that he saved the HBCU. That's not the case. Now, what hasn't been done, what's worth considering when evaluating Trump's action on behalf of Black Americans, and what he hasn't done. There are any number of pieces of legislation or executive actions that could have been embraced by Trump, but he never addressed. Like the recent protest centered on systematic racism in the criminal system offered a good example. Trump has repeatedly talked crap about the protesters, claiming last week that many of the participating in the protest didn't know why they were there, and conflated that protesters with people who engage in criminal vandalism and looting. And let's see, his focus on reforming police practices focused not on Black concerns, but on ensuring that police were comfortable with his proposals. We have the endorsement of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the International Union of Police Association, the majority counties, sheriff, basically everything that you could think of from policing, he's been endorsed by them. He did not mention any endorsements from activists on behalf of those concerns about how the police do their jobs. Child. So, what is your opinion? Yeah, comment below and tell me what your opinion is. I know this is a little long. I'm sorry. I might actually re record it again and put it out differently and just deal with the facts. But you know what? I said no. I'm just going to leave it this way. I hope y'all check this video out and give your opinion. Like all that stuff about HBCs and he's done this and he's done that and he's done this. He really didn't do any of what he said he did. Oh Lord, I gotta go. Just talking about this gave me a headache and my throat hurts. So I'm gonna end it right here.